All right, welcome to this Stata class, Education 401B. I am going to go over, Ben here, I'm going to go over the first exercise. And so how the class is structured, is set up, is there'll be these exercises. I'll go through it, and then your task, as it says here, is to go through the same exercise, but with a different data set. So I just want to get you in there playing around with a different data set so you can see how those work. You can do that as you're watching, going back and forth and pausing the video. You can do it after. If you already know this, you can do this before if you don't need to watch the video. But your task is to do it with a different data set. There's some MTCAR small CSV in the data folder, which is a really small data set and will be valuable because if you're using a really small data set, you can see everything that's happening visually. But if you've got a different data set for a research project or something that you want to use, you can do that. But I'm going to go through it with a data set called hamsters. Shout out to our favorite rodent. And I'm literally just going to follow through this. There's a book that I'm loosely basing this off of. You do not need to buy it, but it's a good resource if you wanted a resource, but it's not necessary for the class. I will also say it's kind of a hassle to get to this exercise on the remote server. So I'm assuming you've logged onto the remote server and you know how to do that. There's another video in order to do that. But basically you open Google Chrome and you navigate to your email or Canvas or whatever, you log in and then you get there. But it takes a few steps. Anyways, let's go to #A, parenthesis, getting started. Create a Stata directory. And so when we work, we're going to create a directory just to hold our files in there. And directory is just a fancy word for a folder. So I'm going to right click and type Stata directory. And so now I've got a folder where I'm going to keep my Stata stuff that I'm working with. On this remote server, I think when I log off, this folder is going to go away, which is why you might want to upload your stuff to Google Drive or Dropbox or some sort of web service, but I'll also have you turn it into Canvas. So as far as getting credit, that will take care of that. Now I'm going to open up the data folder. And like I said, I'm going to show you with this hamsters data. Your task is to do it with MTCARs. Don't do it with the NSYR because we're going to use that for something else. But you can do it with MTCARs or you can do it with a different data set. I will download it. I drag it to the desktop. Now I'm going to put it in my Stata directory. So everything I'm doing from this project or this assignment, it's going to go in the Stata directory. We'll check in 7 days. I don't want to be bothered by this. So I'm going to open Stata up. And the first thing that I'm going to do is this window gets a little intimidating at first. We don't need to worry about it too much, but this is where all of the code is going to run. I want a place where I can type code. And so I'm going to open up this data editor, or this do file editor, not the data editor. And so the do file editor is just going to give us a place that we can type our code and keep track of it as we go. I think that'll be clearer as we go. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, and I wanted to create a Stata directory, and then I want to download data and load it into Stata. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Change Working Directory, and I'm going to find, it's a little tricky with how the server's set up, I'm going to find the Stata directory, and I'm going to click OK. And so the Stata allows you to point and click, but every time you point and click, it produces a command which shows up here. And so this line right next to the period is the command that we just produced. And then this is the output. It tells us where it changed it to. And so what I'm going to do is every time I do that, I want to keep a log of what I've done. And so I'm going to copy this command and I'm going to bring it over to the do file. And so then this do file will serve as a log of everything that's happened. One of the huge benefits of using Stata or these programs as opposed to Excel is you can track everything you've done. As opposed to Excel, you can work for an hour and you just point and clicked around a lot, but you don't know exactly what you couldn't retrace all of the steps that you've done. And so I changed my directory. Once it's here, I can, in order to run it again, I can highlight this code and then hit Control D and it'll run it again. I'm changing over and over again to the Stata directory that I already created. So it's kind of redundant. But now the next thing we want to do is we want to load in our data. So I'm going to go to import, and then I know that hamsters file is a CSV file. And so I'm going to choose that I want to import a CSV. It's going to take a second to pop up. And if I click this browse here, and I go to the Stata directory, oh, I actually tried to open the folder where I wanted to open actual hamsters, the CSV file. And it's going to have all of these default options. The defaults are usually pretty good, but you could check if something looks wrong, then you could change some of these around. Typically, for what we'll work with for now, we'll work with defaults that will work and not worry about the complexity there. I'm going to click submit. And, well, submit ran it, and then I ran it again. But, again, I have just, here's the command that was run. So I'm going to copy that over here. And so now I have import and I've got the CSV. And so now the data is inside here. And what I'm going to do is right here, there's data editor browse. So browse means I'm not going to be able to edit it. I'm just going to be able to look at it. If I click here, I'm going to set up my 3 kind of Stata panes. The 3 windows. So in the top left, because I just think this will, if you're working on multiple monitors, which I love to do, that would be one way to do it. And so in the top left will be where I'm typing my code. In the bottom left will be the data that I'm working with. And then on the right will be the actual console and where I'm running results and doing everything. And so you can see here, here's our data file. Okay, I zoomed in so that we can see better. That took me longer than I wanted to figure it out. Another thing that we'll often do is comment our code, and it happens with the Shift 8. I always forget what that symbol is. And I can just type in what's happening there, and so it kind of structures the information a little bit better. Now, the next thing that we want to do is use the tab and sub command on a variable. What is the difference between these 2 commands? And so I have 4 variables here. This variable looks funny because it's not completely showing it, but it's the variables hamster underscore cages. This data set is the student name, the gender of that student, how many hamsters they own at home, and then the hamster cages is how many cages they have for that hamster. So what I want to be doing is I want to use the tab and sum commands. And so this is very straightforward. I'm going to use tab is my command. And so this is to like tabulate your information. And so if I do tab hamsters, so I'm command and then the variable name that I want to tabulate. And I'm going to highlight that. And I have 2 options. I can either go up to tools, execute selection, just executes what I've highlighted. And I get this output here, or I can hit Control D when I've highlighted it as well. And so if I look at the output of tab hamsters, it gives me basic information about the hamsters distribution. It gives me that for one hamster, there's one person that has one hamster. That makes up 14.29%. I think that's 1/7. There are 2 people that have 2 hamsters, and it gives us just very basic information. Now, there's a similar command, sum, that we can use. And sum, I got really confused at first because I thought we were adding something up. Sum stands for summarize. So if I run that, summarize gives me kind of other basic statistics. This tabulates, so it looks at the different values. This summarizes, so it gives me the mean of the distribution, the standard deviation, the min, and the max. And so that's one way to examine a single variable. Now, the next thing that the exercise wants us to do is use the tab command on 2 variables. And so here I'm just going to, again, Stata's kind of the structure of the commands is I'm going to have a command and then the variable names that I want to use. And so let's do hamsters and then space hamster cages is another variable. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to run it. And so now I get this cross tabulation of multiple variables. There's one person that has 1 hamster and 5 hamster cages. There's one person that has 2 hamsters and 1 hamster cage. Another one that has 2 hamsters and 2 hamster cages. And you can look at these marginal distributions. There's 2 people with 2 hamsters. This is the number of cages. And it's a way to look at multiple distributions at once. And I'm curious. I'm using these numeric. What happens if I do it with gender instead? We can play around and just see. I think that's the best way to learn these programming is to look around and see. And so, okay, cool. So it does the same thing. And now I can see that males, very easy to see here that males generally have fewer hamsters in this data set than females. I guess males don't love the hamsters as much. So that was using the tab command on 2 variables at once. What if the next task is to use the call option? So I am going to do the same thing. We'll tabulate these 2 variables, tab hamsters and gender. And then Stata offers these extra options. If you put a comma and then you can give it an option. And one option for the tab command is this call. And what that does, call not allowed. What just happened there? Do I think that I need... I messed it up. Okay. So I thought you had to give it in quotation marks, and you did not need to give it into quotation marks. And so what this now does is it gives percentages beneath it as a percentage of the column. So this 1 here stands for 33% of the values for females. This 2 stands for 50% of the values of males. And so this is an example of how we can use an option, comma, option. So you can start to see the structure. I highlighted this right here. I think this is very important to keep in mind. Command, variable names, then we'll worry about this if later, and then comma, options. And so the structure of this is the command to Stata, what variable names do I want, comma, and then this option of call here. Now, a very, very, very common thing to do is to want to generate a new variable. And so the way to do that is command first. And now I'm going to give it the variable name that I want. Let's do hamsters. You don't want to have spaces in your variable names, so I'm using underscore. And I'm going to say hamsters per cage equals hamsters divided by hamster cages. And so notice 2 things that happen here. When I ran this, when I highlighted it and hit Control D, you could have gone up to tools as well. It runs it here, but it doesn't show anything. What I've done is I've actually changed the data that I'm working with, and I've added a new column. As soon as I type that, I got this new column, it's this last one, and you can't see the full name, but if I stretch this out and then see here, you can see that that's the new name. And so this gives me the number of hamsters per cage on average. God, I love this data set. And so this person has 5 hamsters. They have 2 hamster cages. They must have, on average, 2.5 hamsters in each cage. Now, what was the next thing? Generate a new variable and recode it. So sometimes you will want to recode the values that you have here. So let's actually say that we think we want to update the number of hamsters. There's some new information, a hamster sale happens, and but some people buy some new hamsters. So I'm going to create a new variable, hamsters new, which will just be, I'll start by just having it be the same thing as the hamsters. So if I run that, hamsters new is literally the exact same thing as the number of hamsters. I said create this new variable and have it be the same thing as the other one. Now I want to use this recode command. And the recode command is super useful, but it can be a little bit confusing. Actually, so there is a recode command, but it's a little, and then replace, but it's a little bit confusing, and I think it's gonna be valuable to first do it with the replace command. And so I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to replace some values with the replace command, and that'll be more straightforward. If you want to look at the recode command, that will let you do a lot of things at once. But here's how this works. I'm going to do replace hamsters new. I'm going to say equals, let's make it so that in hamsters new, anyone that had 2 hamsters before went and they bought 8 more hamsters, so they now have 10. So hamsters new equals 10 if hamsters new equals 2. And so replace, I'm going to replace, make 10 be the new hamsters new for anyone where there's a double equal sign for anyone that had 2. Now, this brings up an important point about equal signs. One equal sign is assignment. It says this should equal this. We want to assign something. 2 equal signs is comparison. It's saying which person had 2 hamsters. That's the person that I want to replace. And so if I run this, watch what's going to happen to these 2s in hamster new. They're going to change to 10s. When I run this, in the console goes my code, and it gives me a little message that 2 real changes were made. And so anyone that had hamsters 2 before now have hamsters 10 in the hamsters new. If you look at the notes in the bottom of the exercise, you can see this replace command. We use the replace command. You can see an example of recode. And so this basically says if you're between 1 and 3, give it a 1. If you're between 4 and 7, give it a 2. If you're between 8 and 20, give it a 3. And then create a new variable out of that. It's a more advanced command that allows you a little bit more functionality if you want to replace multiple values at once. All right, moving on. Where are we? Look at the help for the rename command and then use it to rename a variable. So I've just been giving you commands, and then we've been looking at what they do. Oftentimes, you're not going to know what the command you're looking for is. And so a very common practice is to look at the documentation for the command and try to figure out what it does. Oftentimes, you'll find the command on Google. You'll Google something, and then you'll get pointed to the rename command is probably what I want. But you won't know exactly what to type. And so anytime you know a command, but you don't know exactly what it does, you can type help. And this help will pop up. And it's really, really useful. It's a little bit intimidating at first. So here's the title of the command, rename. And then syntax is rename. And then the old variable name. So let's say I want to rename this hamsters new. And let's say I don't know, this is silly, but let's say I just want to rename it to be hamsters new. In all caps. I'm really excited about them being new, and I'm going to accentuate the E. So that was old variable name, new variable name. Now if I run this, we can get rid of this now. Now if I run this, it's done that. It doesn't show it all to it, but it definitely changed it, and it definitely made it capitalized. So that's good. Now I'm on 8. Use the drop command to remove a column. And so what I'm going to do here is I want to remove a column. Sometimes you have columns you don't want, or sometimes you have rows you don't want. The drop command, interestingly, can get rid of both columns and rows, depending on how you use it. And so to get rid of a column, you literally just type the name of the column that you want to get rid of. Maybe I don't need this hamsters column anymore because I've got this hamsters new one. I think that's the up-to-date one. So if I run this command, you're going to notice this hamsters is going to go away. It got rid of that column for me. I can scroll back over. And so I got rid of that column, which is great. Now, what about getting rid of rows? So that got rid of a column. What about getting rid of rows? It works similarly. And again, you could look at, you don't have to take my word for it. You could Google this and probably find something, or you can look at the help. Drop variables is drop, and you just give a list of variables. And then drop observations, which is rows, is drop if, and then you give it an expression. And so what I'll do is I'll drop, and now I need to come up with some sort of expression. So I'll do if, and who do we want to drop? Let's get rid of the males. Let's get rid of the males. Gender equals, and then these in red, they're what we call strings or characters. And you get a hint that you need to also make it a string or a character up here, because then you can match the reds. So drop if gender equals male. So I'm basically going to remove anyone that's a male. I can get rid of this. And when I did that, I removed my 4 observations, and now I'm only left with females. Only females and their types of hamsters. And so or rows. And so that's the basic functionality that I wanted to get through, and we covered the exercise. We just used the drop command to remove some rows. The last steps is save your do file and your data to your directory. And so to do that, I can just go save as, and then I want to go to my directory. Stop. And let's call this exercise 1. That saved my do file, so that saved the actual code that I was working with. And then data editor and browse, I can also save this. And let's call this data underscore exercise 1. And it already was in this data directory because I'd done that before. And so again, notice here, it's also doing these saves. I won't save that command in the do file, but it's there. And now if I go into my Stata directory, if I double click that, I have exercise 1, this do file. So just to show you, we can log out of Stata. And if I double click exercise 1, it's going to open Stata, and it's going to open that code that I just worked with. And if I double click the data set, it's going to open that data set and look at it, and I can look at the data by getting back into the data editor. And then your last step, I won't do this right now, but your last step is to log into Canvas. So you'd go into Chrome and log into Canvas, and then submit both the do file and the exercise. So you need to do this for a different data set. MT cars is a great option, which is in the data folder, but you're welcome to use any other data set that you like as well. What I want to see you do is use the same commands that we've used. Just go through and find a reason to use those commands and play around. That's the best way to learn these programs, is to play around. So, and then we'll do a different activity in class that will push this forward a little bit further. All right, that's it for now.